What is going on, everyone? Welcome into the next installment of my summer deep dive series as we are taking an in-depth look into every team in the NFL as we break down teams leading up to my number one team in my power rankings heading into the year. Today we reveal the 30th ranked Houston Texans, who are kind of like real boys again. You know, they got DeMeco Ryans, one of the steals as far as staff hirings are concerned. And then they make a splash on draft day to go get two figureheads of their offense and defense, obviously CJ Stroud and Will Anderson. So going to be a very fun team to talk about. Definitely expectations for the Houston Texans that they can continue to grow with all of this youth and the roster turnover and the new staff, to the point that by season's end, they are outplaying this 30th ranking here. Before we do get started, a ton of energy and time goes into this series, to the point that this is all I can do over the summer. So it's really important to me and my channel that this video in this series does well. So if you could just take a second to hit that like button down below, it really does help me out and I'd really appreciate it. And then make sure you're subscribed as well. Join me on this mission to 100,000 subscribers, and you won't miss any of these deep dives as we go. And hey, we've got our first guest today, and it's a banger of a guest interview with Brett Kollmann, who was born and raised a Texans fan. So make sure you stick around to the end of the video for that. We had a great chat with Brett. But without further ado, let's get started recapping this team's very busy offseason. I thought the Cardinals had a lot of stuff to put on this graphic here. The Texans had even more. And the Texans, unlike the Cardinals, was much more about the additions that they made. Now, you have this much turnover, you're going to let some bodies go. But really, for the most part, you're not really going to sweat losing a lot of these guys. The one big one is going to be Brandon Cooks, who just didn't want to be around here anymore. I will say, man, reviewing film for this Texans team, Brandon Cooks is so underrated still, and that is their most explosive player. That is going to be something that they're going to have to try and find this year. But beyond that, you know, AJ Cann was adequate last year, played 1,000 snaps for them. But they do bring in Shaq Mason as an upgrade at right guard. And then Ogbonnia Okoronkwo was also pretty good for them. I want to say he was second on the team in pressures last year. And, you know, they draft Will Anderson on the edge there. But those are some, you know, key players from last year's team that are leaving. But beyond that, you know, it's a list of departures that, you know, you're going to thank these guys for being there when no one else really wanted to. They put in a lot of snaps and time and effort, but they upgraded really across the board for everyone on this list. Head coach, offensive coordinator. Well, we'll see if Bobby Sloak is an upgrade to Pep Hamilton, who I do like, but DeMeco Ryans absolutely an upgrade over Lovie Smith as your defensive head coach. You know, a bunch of rotational pass catchers there. Philip Dorsett, Chris Moore, Jordan Akins, O.J. Howard. On the defensive line, Mario Addison. Rasheem Green actually got a decent contract by the Chicago Bears. I don't really know why. But then Jonathan Owens, the snap count leader amidst these unconcerning departures. But another player where, all right, you're replacing a starter with a huge upgrade in Jimmy Ward there, listed in the big additions. So, you know, they're big starters other than Brandon Cooks. They upgraded. That's going to be the one spot where you're going to have some question marks about if that position group is actually better than it was last year. But as we slide over to that list of big additions, it's a really impressive offseason that the Houston Texans had. We're going to talk about this staff in just a moment with DeMeco Ryans and Bobby Sloak. Also not listed is Matt Burke, the theoretical defensive coordinator under DeMeco Ryans. But then, of course, CJ Stroud in the draft. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about him. Some pass catchers, Dalton Schultz and Robert Woods added in free agency. John Mechie is going to be listed as an addition. Shout out to John Mechie, who has recovered from his cancer and is now taking snaps and basically going to have his rookie season here. Tank Dell, a third-round pick, hometown kid out of Houston. We talked about Shaq Mason, Will Anderson. They bring in Sheldon Rankins to upgrade their defensive tackle position. Much needed. Denzel Perriman, one of the underrated signings of the entire offseason. Excited to rave about him later in the show. Jimmy Ward, as mentioned. And even just under the radar, they add Shaquille Griffin to the cornerback room. which is going to be really nice depth there. Even some smaller additions. Devin Singletary, you could argue, could be listed as a big addition, depending on Dameon Pierce's health. He's been the starting running back in Buffalo for the last 3.5 years. Noah Brown, decent receiver there. Chase Winovich trying to kick the tires there. Love the Dylan Horton pick in the 4th round. Jacob Martin returns to Houston after having a career year in Houston 2 years ago. Was actually acquired, for those that remember, and I know Texans fans do, Jacob Martin was acquired in the Jadeveon Clowney trade. Then some linebackers, Corey Littleton, who had a good year for the Carolina Panthers last year, and Henry To'oTo'o in the 5th round of the draft, among some other guys that we're going to talk about as we get into the roster portion of this video. A complete roster turnover for this Texans team. And it's important to know, like, this is a preposterous is the wrong word. This amount of turnover was necessary as this team is really digging themselves out of the gutter, where they had to fill their roster with anybody that actually wanted to be there. Now they have, obviously free agents that want to come here and play for DeMeco Ryans and be a part of hopefully something special here. But when you're literally flipping the roster inside out and the staff inside out, there's a lot to figure out. You got to figure out your go-to plays. You got to find out who your core players are, who your go-to players are, who your starters are. Like, there is going to be a transition period. I find it pretty unlikely that this team's going to just hit the ground running, especially given how bad this team has been for the last 2 years. But you're definitely excited about, the roster really shaping up and stacking up against real NFL teams now, whereas it's been in part like an XFL roster, especially as you go back to like 2021. It has been brutal here for various position groups here. And yeah, it's going to be a fun team to talk about with the roster. But I do want to start by talking about the staff additions here. And getting DeMeco Ryans was so lucky for the Houston Texans, because we've seen over the last 2 years, no one's really wanted this job. But DeMeco Ryans is a Texan. He played linebacker for the Texans, was at least a Pro Bowler, was probably made all-pro teams. I'm sorry if I'm, selling him short. I do remember watching him play as a Houston Texan. He was awesome. And he was one of, if not the top overall head coach candidates in this entire hiring cycle. And for the Houston Texans, in the state of this franchise, to land him for a unique circumstance because he played for you, that was a godsend for this organization. That's before we even talk about the X's and O's side of things with DeMeco Ryans, where he is one of the brilliant defensive minds in the league. But I think from a culture perspective, now he's got a lot of work to do, and they're still going to rank towards the bottom in terms of overall team culture. But I think you're very optimistic that in time, he's going to, have that leadership aspect of the head coach position, get that team buy-in, and really contribute to player development as well. Certainly on the defensive side of the ball, but I think the carryover to the offensive side with the team culture will eventually come in. But one last time, I just cannot stress enough, that doesn't just happen overnight. It takes time to build relationships and understand the people in the building and how to work with each individual person. So that's going to be one of DeMeco's big goals this year, along with turning this defense into a really solid group. I mean, there's talent there for sure. There's holes as well. But you aren't just excited about DeMeco from the leadership aspect. You're excited about what he's going to be able to do for this defense. And I genuinely believe DeMeco Ryans is one of the premium defensive minds in the NFL. And I think, if not this year, although I think it's possible, within the first couple years, I think DeMeco Ryans can be one of those premium defensive coaches that can take a roster that any given year might be the 22nd best roster in the league defensively and scrap out a top 10 to 15 defense out of that group. That's why you go and get a guy that's as skilled with the X's and O's that DeMeco Ryans is. So as far as what his defense is going to look like, it's going to be that four-man front that we've become accustomed to watching in San Francisco, going back to when Robert Saleh was the defensive coordinator above DeMeco. But DeMeco took over for Saleh and arguably did a better job than Saleh did, and that's saying a lot. The first thing that stands out to me about this scheme is the stunts and games that this team runs with their front four. and the ability to manufacture pressure. I'll shout out my guy, Robert Mays of The Athletic, along with Nate Tice, and they've kind of coined the term for that Niners defense. They make you feel like you're running into a hurricane because of the amount of slants and twists and stunts that they do up there, but they manage to do it with discipline, to the point that I don't even fully understand how they maintain gap discipline, especially against the run, while also, of course, manufacturing pressure and scheming guys unblocked and just making not just a physical nightmare to play against because they're fast and strong and they just play like a bunch of maniacs, but also mentally draining to go against a unit like this, because you have to constantly pass guys off and figure out where not just the twists are coming from, but blitzing linebackers and defensive backs. And that's the first thing that really has stood out to me about DeMeco Ryans' scheme in San Francisco. And then on the back end, you know, I like how this is kind of that modern Seattle 3 defense. Robert Salah stems from that Legion of Boom staff, and DeMeco has definitely learned how to call plays through that sort of tree. And the Niners were towards the top in the league in cover 3 last season, but this is the more modern Seattle 3 defense, where it's going to be a lot more off coverage, a lot more quarters as well, and cover 6. But unlike those Fangio style defenses that to me tend to be a little bit too conservative, I feel like DeMeco Ryans gets conservative when he needs to be. And I say conservative, more just safe, I guess, by playing off coverage. But the Jets and the Niners over the last couple of years have been much more willing to get in guys' face and play physical defense on 3rd and 1, 4th and 2, you name it. And that's my biggest gripe with all these teams running that Fangio style defense. You're not going to get that shit in Houston now. If it's a have to have it down, they're going to play like they want to play defense. And DeMeco Ryans is going to meet them on the sideline and celebrate with his guys when they get that big critical stop. So you're absolutely stoked that this team got DeMeco Ryans. To me, that's bigger than drafting CJ Stroud or Will Anderson, or, you know, I was going to say attracting free agents, but I think the ability to attract free agents is a direct result of getting not just a real coach in the building. With all due respect to, you know, Coach Lovie Smith and Kollmann before him, I think they did their job to get them to the point that they're in now. Those coaches weren't getting hired as head coaches anywhere else. DeMeco could have had any opening really that he wanted, and the Texans got him. So while it's going to take some time to kind of implement everything culture-wise, leadership-wise, scheme-wise, you couldn't be any more optimistic about this hiring. Now, we don't need to spend a ton of time on Matt Burke, because he's just going to do what DeMeco tells him to do. But I do like that he comes from, you know, he's been around the league. DeMeco is a younger coach. Burke has been a defensive coordinator. He's worked with a bunch of head coaches, and he's ran every scheme in the book, really. It's been mostly under 4-3 fronts with Jim Schwartz and Jeff Fisher and Marvin Lewis, but, you know, did a little bit of the 3-4 stuff with Vance Joseph in Arizona. And hell, I thought Arizona overachieved last year based on their defensive roster talent. That defense was like, I don't know, 23rd in the league, maybe a little bit better, and they should have been 32nd. So I don't have anything bad to say about Matt Burke. The Niners are going to rank in that tier 2 of great defensive coaching, and that's a pretty impressive place to start for a first-year head coach in DeMeco Ryans. As far as the offensive coach and scheme is concerned, they hired Bobby Slowick, which means they're definitely planning on going towards the, you know, modern Kyle Shanahan-esque offensive approach with the wide zone offenses that stem into play action. And our guest for today's video actually just made a video on on Shanahan-based offenses. You know, we're going to be talking a lot about Shanahan offenses. Our first 3 teams in this series have all been in this coaching tree. About half the league runs this type of system. So I will defer you to that video. But yeah, that's going to be the approach here. I think the hiring is sound. We'll see what he can do. He's still a young mind, technically a former coworker of mine at PFF, but went to San Francisco in 2017 from there and has climbed the ranks. And it was only a matter of time before he got an offensive coordinator position somewhere, because that's just what happens when you coach under Kyle Shanahan for 5 years. It's only a matter of time. And more often than not, these guys turn into studs. It's just a coaching factory there in San Francisco right now. I think Slowick is a really smart guy. I love that he comes from a defensive background. He theoretically will know the weaknesses and certain coverages and team tendencies, and I'm really excited to see what he has to offer. And I'm also intrigued, like, does he work with CJ Stroud? Because Stroud ran mostly spread stuff at Ohio State. And I'm curious, like, do they kind of implement that into the playbook a lot more? Because you don't get a lot of spread concepts in San Francisco. But you look at maybe another Shanahan-style scheme like the Rams, who we just talked about in my last deep dive. They do go a lot more empty and quick game and spread stuff. And CJ Stroud's really good at that stuff. So I'm very curious to see what sort of balance they have to really provide for CJ Stroud. I can't rank him too high because we just don't know that much about him, but I'm optimistic for the Bobby Slowick hire as well. And another benefit of bringing in DeMeco Ryans is you are able to bring in a Niners guy that probably would have gotten an offensive coordinator position somewhere, if not this year, somewhere else next year. So overall, a lot of optimism for this coaching staff, even if they still have some stuff to prove and develop as an organization when it comes to culture. Next up, we're going to take a look at this team's roster. But before we do that, I got to tell you about my good friends at Underdog Fantasy. Underdog is truly changing the game when it comes to fantasy football in two different ways. Number one is going to be best ball fantasy. Hey, what's the best part of fantasy football? It's draft day, right? You get together with your friends, you think about all day who you're going to pick, and then you just sit there all night staring at your new roster all night because you're so happy with it. Well, you can have draft day right now through Best Ball Fantasy. You can compete in Best Ball Mania 4, the biggest fantasy football competition literally of all time, and it is draft, set it, and forget it. No daily moves, no waiver wires, no trades. It's all about the draft. You can compete for huge winnings. I have loved doing Best Ball Fantasy. And on top of that, you can play daily pick'em contests and Underdog as well. And this is not just for the NFL. I've been playing this for every MLB game that I go to. You set your lineups anywhere from 2 to 5 picks, picking props, things like fantasy points, home runs, passing yards, points in basketball as we look at the NBA Finals coming up here. And again, massive payouts up to 20 to 1. So small entries with massive rewards that massively increase your interest in any given sporting event. I cannot swear by Underdog Fantasy anymore. And right now, if you sign up using promo code TFG, they will match up to $100 on your first deposit, and you'll support my channel in a big way in the process. So that's promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy. So let's start the roster breakdown by talking about the passing game and naturally the quarterback with CJ Stroud, who this team absolutely splashed to acquire on draft day. Technically, they just stayed put and took him at number 2, but they really wanted Will Anderson. They always wanted Will Anderson, an Alabama guy for DeMeco Ryans' defense, who went to Alabama. But they gave up pretty much the farm to get CJ Stroud. And it's a very fascinating conversation. I don't want to go too far down this road because I think Stroud's going to be a good quarterback, and I understand why they felt like they needed this quarterback now, because the fans have been through a lot and this locker room is ready for a real quarterback in the room, and they got one in CJ Stroud. But I do think it's going to be very fascinating to see if this team is bad and if Caleb Williams and or Drake May are as good as they're currently being basically projected to be. There's potential for this to be a very big mistake, and it was a big decision to do what they did. I will just leave it at that. Now, back to CJ Stroud. I think there is this perception out there about me that I don't like CJ Stroud because, number one, I thought the idea of anybody taking him above Bryce Young in this draft was just ridiculous. Bryce Young, to me, was a tier above the other 3 quarterbacks in this draft. I'm glad the Panthers ultimately reached that conclusion. But also because, kind of like I just alluded to with the Caleb Williams, Drake May conversation, what I've talked about in my film breakdown about CJ Stroud that I highly recommend you check out because it will reinforce a lot of the things I'm about to say about CJ Stroud. But I do think he has a more limited upside as a passer, and I will get to why I feel that way. But I also think he's going to be a very good quarterback. I think he was worth the number 2 pick in most situations. I think the Texans are in a unique spot where they may have been able to play their cards and use those picks to beef up the roster and go get a Caleb Williams next year. Again, a fascinating conversation to see how it plays out over the next couple of years. But I had a true first-round grade on CJ Stroud. I even had a higher grade on him than I did on Justin Fields coming out of Ohio State. And as a rookie, the Texans are going to rank 24th at quarterback in the league. I think CJ Stroud is going to be a really good quarterback in the NFL. And I think as long as the transition away from that absurdly talented surrounding cast at Ohio State to the NFL, where things are certainly going to get more difficult for him than things were for the Buckeyes, as long as that transition and the speed of the game isn't too much for him, he can be a really good quarterback right away. My pro comps for him are somewhere between Jared Goff and Dak Prescott. Now, those are 2 quarterbacks that haven't been able to reach that kind of tier 1, tier 2 of really great quarterbacks that you win because of. Those are more quarterbacks, along with the Kirk Cousins and Ryan Tannehills and Derek Carrs, that you have to win with. And like the Buckeyes did, surround this guy with amazing surrounding talent, and you can win a Super Bowl with a guy like, Goff or Dak or what ultimately I think CJ Stroud is going to be. Now, of course, I need to throw the caveat in there that anybody can surprise me and I can be wrong, but the things that, let's just do his negatives first, because we're ultimately working our way there anyway, and then we'll end this on a positive note with what he does really well. The things CJ Stroud struggles with and the things that I think are ultimately going to limit his upside are things that separate the elite quarterbacks from the guys like Jared Goff and Dak Prescott at the NFL level, and are things that really typically do not get better. And it all basically comes down to pocket presence. And I know people are going to point to the Georgia game and say, look, CJ Stroud, once under pressure, he made plays with his feet. He extended plays. And yes, it was absolutely good to see that. And honestly, as I got through all of his games and charted his games throughout the year, I had noted that when he sees pressure, he has the mobility and the instincts to escape and get out of that pressure. But the bigger thing for me with pocket presence and with a guy like CJ Stroud isn't necessarily what he does when he is pressured. But to me, the other side of pocket presence that's arguably more important is, how do you manage the pocket when you aren't pressured? On top of that, do you navigate the pocket and manipulate angles to buy yourself time and make it so that you aren't walking yourself into pressure? Think about Tom Brady, for example, has some of the best pocket presence ever. I think him and Aaron Rodgers are your 2 easiest premium examples of this, but it's a sixth sense to navigate pressure while keeping your eyes downfield, to know when and how to use their feet to extend plays, not just outside of the pocket, but inside the pocket. And with CJ Stroud, I don't think he knows when he isn't pressured. He has very much a timer. When he gets to his dropbacks, he's going to get through his progressions. Now, again, unlike Justin Fields at Ohio State, at least he will go read 1, 2, 3, and then if he doesn't like what he sees, he's going to take off. But you can still leave a lot of meat on the bones when you do that. When actually all you need to do is take a step to the left or a step up, and that tackle is going to earn that angle, and you've got another 2 seconds to throw while you're surveying the field to see when those receivers are coming open. That's what the elite quarterbacks do in the NFL. Ultimately, that is what separates Bryce Young from CJ Stroud in this draft class, and it's what separates those top tier quarterbacks from your guys like Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, etc., etc. And unless that improves, it's going to be really difficult for CJ Stroud to become an elite quarterback in the NFL. That's the big one. And then honestly, I also felt like he was really erratic when he did get to those play extension situations. A lot of chucking balls up into dangerous situations. Honestly, his accuracy when he wasn't throwing from a clean platform did fluctuate much more. And he doesn't have this dominant arm talent to, he doesn't have that see-ball, hit-ball arm, as I describe it, to truly put the ball wherever he wants, whenever he wants. Much like Tom Brady, honestly, he can do that from a clean platform, but when he's on the move, there are some more limiting factors there. Hence, a lot of those Jared Goff comps. You see that with him as well. But enough about the negative. Because ultimately, if he becomes the 10th best quarterback in the NFL on a rookie contract and the Texans build something really special here, you're not going to regret taking CJ Stroud, right? And the reason I like the Jared Goff comp, and people scoff at that, they goff at that, but Jared Goff was the #1 pick in the draft for a reason. He took the Rams to a Super Bowl. He's led some of the most, honestly, dynamic passing performances of recent memory. Watch his game against the Vikings, Monday Night Football 2017, I think it was. It was like frickin' Dan Marino-esque, the way he was placing balls down the field, just like CJ Stroud, Jared Goff, and Stroud. These guys both have that moonball dime potential, the way the ball flies out of their hand, even down to the throwing mechanics, and also like their processing and decision-making being, I would describe, good, not great. As passers, I felt like I was watching Jared Goff play for the Buckeyes in his final season. But I think you put a little bit more mobility on Jared Goff, and that's where some of the Dak Prescott comps come in. Now, I think Stroud and Dak, as we've already said, don't always know when and how to use their feet. But when they do, they're very effective. They have size to brush off potential sackers, and certainly more speed than someone like Jared Goff to run for first downs and even become a part of the read option game and change the numbers in the run game a little bit. So I think a best case scenario is CJ Stroud is a hybrid of Goff and Prescott. Now, I don't know if Stroud's ever going to be the surgeon that Prescott is, because I would say Prescott has some of the best pre-snap processing in the game. It's hard to expect any quarterback to reach that level. But I think anywhere from the 8th to 13th best quarterback on any given year, depending on his surrounding cast, is in play for CJ Stroud. Now, I also think there's a world where, just as we've seen with Ohio State quarterbacks, the speed of the game is too much. He isn't comfortable in the pocket. He gets a little bit wonky and inaccurate and makes bad decisions. I am not saying that's going to happen, but I'd be lying if I said it's not creeping into the back of my mind that there's going to be some bust potential for a guy that had absurd pass protection and absurd receiver playmakers at Ohio State. I don't think it's going to happen, but I sure as hell do think it's possible. So it's a very interesting conversation. I think we covered all our bases there. Definitely pulling for him. Really fun guy. Loved his interview on the McAfee show. Seems just like a really fun guy, and I know why they made the decision to just make him their franchise quarterback and build around him. And if he doesn't turn into the next elite quarterback, they'll live with defense and build up around him. And maybe he does discover some of those high-end traits that I didn't see from him at Ohio State. Beyond that, your backup room is, for what it's worth, probably one of the better backup rooms in the league. You got Davis Mills, who I did think came on a little bit late last year. Just the play extension picked up. He got benched and then put back into the lineup. You know, he was such a stiff for a while. I think he felt like he had to be this Stanford pocket passing surgeon, when in reality, he's just not that good at seeing the field. He's fine, but he's just not that guy. Once he started to run a little bit more, you got a little bit more high volatility play from him. As a backup, I think you're fine with that. Case Keenum's going to be a really great guy to have in the locker room, too. He's done a really good job as the backup. Being that guy in Josh Allen's ear in Buffalo, returns to Houston, and I think they do keep him around just to kind of be a mentor for C.J. Stroud. So they're going to rank 24th coming into the league, and I definitely think they can finish, 15, 16 if C.J. Stroud really is that guy that we saw at Ohio State, and the speed of the game isn't too much for him. But let's talk about the guys he's throwing the football to. And it's, like I said, not going to be what he had at Ohio State. And this is going to be one of those things you look at and say, if C.J. Stroud has a disappointing rookie season, you're going to probably look at these wide receivers and say that is priority number uno with that Browns first-round pick to probably address, because you have Robert Woods, who they bring in from Tennessee. Now, I love the scheme fit. He was at his best with the Rams, and the Titans saw the same thing, but he couldn't stay healthy for the Titans last year. But you talk about that big-bodied, physical, middle-of-the-field receiver for this Shanahan system that's going to eat off of play-action crossing routes. That's Robert Woods at his best. Can he stay healthy on the opposite side of 30 after tearing his ACL in 2021, I believe it was? He hasn't been that guy for a couple years now. So they're rolling the dice on him. This could just be a Sterling Shepard situation, though, where he's just not really all that available. I don't have anything wrong with the signing because he was cheap, but expectations have got to be pretty low for him. If he can stay healthy, though, he's in theory a good number 2 guy, but he sure as hell is not a number 1 guy, as we've seen throughout his career. And then your next 3 guys you want to talk about are youth. Nico Collins, heading into year 3 now, obviously has not had the best quarterback play here coming into the league with Davis Mills, but the flashes have been really brilliant that he can be that sort of, Mike Williams-esque big-bodied X wide receiver. I don't know if he's quite as physically imposing and strong as a guy like Mike Williams or T. Higgins, but maybe a better, comp there would be ascending to the point of being like a Devontae Parker as a good perimeter number 2 X wide receiver. I think C.J. Stroud, I'll just put it this way, I'd be pretty surprised if Nico Collins wasn't their leading receiver, just because I think Robert Woods is going to be an availability question mark throughout the season. And with how C.J. Stroud attacked defenses in college and how much he loved, throwing those back shoulders down the sideline against single high to Marvin Harrison, I think him and Nico Collins, especially as the year goes on, are really going to develop a nice rapport. So I do think Nico Collins has a clear role projection here. Now, the scheme isn't always going to allow for that, because it is going to be a lot of play action and 12 personnel and having these guys run deep posts and flag routes and crossing routes. But third down, when he's able to line up on the outside, I think that's going to be his number 1 wide receiver. And then you got John Mechie out of Alabama. Love John Mechie. Definitely was just kind of pushed down the board a little bit in what was, proved out to be a phenomenal 2021 or 2022 rather rookie receiving class. But if you put Mechie in, say, this draft class, I don't know if he would have snuck into the first round, but we probably would have talked him up a little bit more. He's a really, by the way, fully recovered from cancer, it sounds like. So thank God he is healthy and can resume his football career. And we can talk about John Mechie, the football player, again. But as a football player, he's an exciting player. I think he's kind of your ideal possession wide receiver where you can put him out wide. You can put him in the slot. He's got quick feet. He's a good route runner with, room to improve from his Alabama tape. I didn't think he had the sharpest routes, but certainly could separate from any alignment. He's elusive and tough after the catch. Honestly, Robert Woods is not a horrible pro comp for a guy like John Mechie. So I love, that sort of pairing as a mentor, if you will. The biggest thing for John Mechie that was really inconsistent in his final year at Alabama that led him from being a projected first-round pick to being a second-round pick ultimately were the ball skills. The ability to win contested balls and play through contact down the field. Felt like he was a little bit slender and lacked some of that play strength at times. That's where Robert Woods really grew throughout his career. So again, it's going to be the perfect mentor for John Mechie, and I do think the upside is there, but we also just haven't really seen anything from him. He's effectively a second-round rookie right now, but the upside is there to be a good number 2 and a nice compliment to Nico Collins. And then you bring in Tank Dell in the 3rd round, who is the ultimate outlier, 164 pounds, a complete twig, but got to see him in person down in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, and he absolutely worked anybody who lined up in front of him. He, along with a lot of shorter wide receivers over time, have really changed the way I perceive shorter receivers when it comes to beating press coverage. When you have rapid foot speed and elite release technique, it doesn't matter if you don't have a length advantage because defensive backs can't get their hands on him. So if you put him outside or in the slot, doesn't really matter against press coverage, I think he's going to stack. I think he's going to, work off of tight coverage, and he's going to be open. And now you're pairing him with an accurate quarterback like C.J. Stroud, which I said for Tank Dell in the pre-draft process is of utmost importance because the biggest knock on Tank Dell is catch radius. And if you've got a quarterback that's consistently 5 or 6 inches off the mark, that's going to really matter with a guy like Tank Dell. But C.J. Stroud, his best trait is accuracy. So there's potential for him to be a really nice fit in this offense. And in a Shanahan system, theoretically, they should be able to scheme him open as well on jet sweeps. Not that you need to scheme him open, but just get him in space and let him work. So there's going to be obvious bust potential really with a short wide receiver like this. We haven't seen a lot of these undersized outlier types really become full-time starters in the NFL, if any. But it is a situation where he can succeed, and I love the hometown effect. Would I have taken Josh Downs? Yes. Might they regret letting him stay in the AFC South and go to the Colts? Potentially. But it's still a good pick in its own right. Then you got Noah Brown, who's going to be a true backup to Nico Collins, big-bodied possession winner on the outside. He's kind of reached his ceiling in Dallas as a, NFL caliber wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. He's fine for what he is and where they have him. They also draft Xavier Hutchinson out of Iowa State, who kind of like Noah Brown in that I would be really surprised if he was ever a high-end starter, just because the speed and the quickness and the route running aren't really there. He's going to be a fairly easy cover for NFL defensive backs, but the ball skills, the savviness, the toughness for the position are absolutely there. And as a roster filler, I think you're pretty happy with them. They also have Amari Rodgers, who they brought in from Green Bay last year off of waivers. Year 4 now for Amari Rodgers, who was a 3rd-round pick, and Green Bay just could never really find a way to use him. Going to be a similar system here with the Shanahan-style offense that Rodgers struggled to get on the field for over in Green Bay. But once he arrived in Houston, they let him loose. He was doing what he did at Clemson, catching deep balls out of the slot and producing. So we'll see if he makes this team. If he does, there might be a path for slot playing time because I think you could make a case he's the one true slot on this team, even though, Woods, Mechie, Dell, they can play in the slot. But Amari Rodgers is a true slot, as is Steven Sims, who I don't see making the team. And Jalen Camp, his last name is Camp for a reason, because he can't get out of camp and onto a roster. But he's always there because he's a freak athlete. Then you get to the tight end group, and a solid group. They bring in Dalton Schultz, also from Dallas, and he's going to be a mainstay. Possession tight end, your classic jack of all trades, master of none at the tight end position. The one thing he's really good at is he has a really good understanding of spatial awareness after the catch. When he sits down in his zone, he understands where defenders are coming from, and he sets up these subtle spins and jukes to get an extra 4 or 5 yards upfield really well. So Texans fans can keep an eye out for that thing that he does there. But when it comes to route running and contested catches and hands consistency and overall run after the catch, he's just a good player. Nothing too exciting. He didn't get a big contract. for a reason, but he's also a pretty good run blocker as well. So that was a nice signing and definitely a piece that they needed, because you really don't have anyone as reliable as Dalton Schultz here in the receiving game. And they always say a tight end is a rookie quarterback's best friend, and I do think Dalton Schultz is going to be a very productive player. And you want to talk about like underdog fantasy and stuff, he's going way too late, because I think he's going to get you 4 or 5 receptions a week, 40, 50 yards, and touchdown potential. So if you're doing best ball fantasy, you can get that kind of, weekly consistency from him, and then also gamble on a higher upside guy like Kyle Pitts or whoever it may be. But anyway, away from fantasy football and back to the Texans. Behind Dalton Schultz, you're going to have a rotation here between Tegan Quitoriano, who's more of your full-sized, big-bodied tight end, decent blocker, decent contested catch guy, young player, still kind of carving out his role in the NFL. Probably never going to be a starter there. And then Brevin Jordan, who I do like how he's going to fit in this offense. You talk about all of these Shanahan-style tight ends, your Jonnu Smiths and Gerald Everetts, guys that can Chigo Okonkwo, these kind of 6'2", 6'3" wing tight ends with good good straight line speed. So off of play action, they can kind of peel away on a crossing route or get lost and be good guys after the catch. Much better fit in this type of offense for Brevin Jordan. So I do expect him to have some good games from the scheme, but he kind of is what he is as a player. I wouldn't say he's quite as explosive as some of those names we just listed. I think maybe a better comp for him is someone like MyCole Pruitt, who's had, good success as that wing tight end for the Titans, the Vikings, the Falcons, all in these types of systems. Yeah, I think Brevin Jordan can have some decent playing time and make an impact in the role that they're going to ask him to be, but I don't see him becoming some consistent dominant starter or anything like that. And then they got Mason Schreck, who's been bouncing around rosters for a while, competing for that last tight end spot with undrafted pickup in Jordan Murray. As far as the running backs in the receiving game are concerned, it's not a problem, but it's nothing too exciting. Dameon Pierce is really good in the screen game, as most backs kind of are. It's just more natural, but not some dynamic route runner as a bigger-bodied guy, and 4 drops in his rookie season that he's got to clean up. He was better than that in the receiving game at Florida. Potential for him to be more of a quote-unquote B receiving running back. Got to clean up some pass protection stuff as well. So room for growth. He's fine. Obviously, really difficult guy to tackle in space. And then Devin Singletary, kind of likewise, has never been some dynamic receiving threat for the Bills, but he's been kind of a mainstay. He's been a reliable check down target for Josh Allen, a guy that's pretty good at making that first guy miss, whether it's a screen or a check down, but not a very fast player as far as, separating down the field. Not some great route runner out of the backfield, so he's fine. Mike Boone does have a little bit more of that athleticism. He's shown flashes in his career. He's bounced around the league, Minnesota, Denver. He kind of fits the scheme in the run game, so he'll probably be around. Dari Agumbawale is actually pretty skilled in the receiving game, just not a talented football player, really. Not fast, not elusive. Jared Doak's more of a bigger-bodied bruiser. Xavier Valade is definitely someone to keep an eye on, though. Undrafted pickup out of Arizona State. The final 4 games of his career, he burst onto the scene in the receiving game. I think he had like 20 or 25 receptions in his last 4 games. He's a really explosive player. He tested very well. If he makes this team, I wouldn't be all that surprised if he gets legitimate third down work for this team. So that's kind of the one guy that I see legitimate receiving back upside. Crazier things have happened than a back coming in and turning into a good scat back as an undrafted pickup. He is 25 years old, though. So overall, they rank 30th for weapons around the league. It's not a decrepit group. Rookie quarterbacks have come in and had worse surrounding casts to throw to, but you definitely don't have much dynamism at all here. The one guy that you could say is like dynamic is Tank Dell, but we don't know how well he's going to translate at his size. And even then, he ran a 4.49. I don't know that he's some insane deep threat. There's going to be a lot of tight windows for Stroud to throw to. These guys are going to have to really get on the same page quickly when it comes to, being on time and trusting each other in key situations. If this team season doesn't go the way a lot of Texans fans hope it will, I think it's this receiving group that you're probably going to point to. And then maybe it's like the other Ohio State quarterback where you're like, well, let's get him into the next year with some much more real weapons. It is worth noting that as of this recording, DeAndre Hopkins is entertaining the Houston Texans. They have a lot of cap space to throw at him. I don't know. I guess I'll believe it when I see it that he's going to go back to Houston, but he'll follow the money. So that would obviously be a massive addition to this group and would kind of change the whole narrative. Honestly, if Hopkins signs here, it might be enough to do kind of like what I did with when Baker Mayfield went to the Panthers, and I had to kind of revisit the conversation and re-rank the team as a whole, because it might push the Texans up. I don't know for sure, but that would be a great signing if they can pull it off. We'll see. Let's get to the offensive line. I like this group in pass protection. They have two clear potential weaknesses at left guard and center, but they're hoping that those guys won't be the weaknesses. So let's just start there. Kenyon Green, their first-round pick last year, entering year 2. High first-round pick, too. I think he was the 13th or 15th pick in the draft. But then they take Juice Scruggs at the end of the second round. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about Juice with Brett Kollmann, who got to sit down with Juice in Vegas for the Shrine Bowl. But needless to say, it was a big surprise when he came off the board in the second round. So both these guys are going to be your question marks. The rest of the O-line's pretty good. But with Kenyon Green, the year one just did not go how you would expect. He was a pretty damn sound guard at Texas A&M. Some of the deficiencies in pass protection were there, but they really showed up in his rookie year in what ended up being a pretty rough run. He had to face the NFC East defensive tackles, Dexter Lawrence. He had to face DeForest Buckner twice a year. And those guys really gave him a run for his money and made him look bad, like more than they normally do. But it wasn't just those guys. He struggled all year long in pass protection, and it's just going to have to be better, man. There's really no way around it. He's got to improve his feet. He's got to improve his hands, and more conversation to come about Kenyon Green with Brett Kollmann later in the episode. Then you got Juice Scruggs, who, like I said, was a surprise pick in the second round. I see what they like in him as far as the athleticism and the wide zone blocking. I did see a lack of play strength in his game. I think that's ultimately why it was such a surprise that he went when he did. It was not a good interior offensive line class, and I do think they reached to get a guy that they felt could be a starter. And it seems Luke Whippler had some pretty major health concerns, who would have been nice to, with this scheme, reunite CJ Stroud with his center, Luke Whippler, but they're obviously worried about that, and I can't fully fault them for saying Juice Scruggs is the next guy after that we got to get, but I don't think you had to get him in the second round. So I do like the scheme fit. He's very smooth out of his stance, can reach block and earn that leverage in the wide zone blocking game, but if you get him one-on-one, just as we saw teams isolate Scott Kessenberry, who was a problem last year, if you isolate Juice Scruggs, I don't think he's going to hold up all that well against NFL, meat and power rushers in the NFL. I'm just worried about it. I am. Hope he proves me wrong there. Now, I should probably talk about Kenyon Green as a run blocker, where he's better. I felt like his ability to sustain blocks was way worse than it was at Texas A&M. Where was the latching and the foot drive that we saw at Texas A&M? So often he was falling off blocks and not connecting on his move blocks, and that could potentially get even worse in a wide zone blocking scheme. It was really just a disappointing season for Kenyon Green overall, but I did like him as a prospect. I didn't think it was a bad pick when they made it, and you're hopeful that things can come together in year 2, but man, it was rough. Year 1, he was one of the worst guards in all of football in his rookie season. Right now, just living off of that first-round pedigree, and we have seen first-round busts in the past flame out of the league rather quickly on the offensive line, and you're just hoping that that's not Kenyon Green. Now, you go outside of those two, and it's pretty damn good, and, these two guys have some upside together, and if they aren't an issue for them, this all of a sudden can be a top 10 offensive line. It really can, but right now, on paper, those are some just major holes that are going to leave some question marks for this group and for Stroud's protection. But having a left tackle like Laramie Tunsil is never something you're going to complain about. Man, I think it's between him and David Bakhtiari for who the best pass protecting tackle in the NFL are. He's just such a machine. His posture, his explosiveness out of his stance, his hand placement, his technique. Khalil Mack got him a couple times, but for the most part, he was back at it again this year. An elite left tackle, an all-pro caliber player. And I cannot commend Nick Caserio, the GM here, I can't commend him enough for valuing Laramie Tunsil and working things out to the point that he didn't basically force his way out of here when things got so bad. Because if you had traded him and you didn't have if you didn't have him for CJ Stroud, you're a lot more pessimistic that he's going to have the time to get the ball to these receivers and to not have to worry about his blind side for a guy that doesn't have the best pocket presence is going to be a great asset for CJ Stroud. So I love that. That's the best thing that this offense has going for them is Laramie Tunsil. Now, not the run blocker that he is in pass protection. He's much more fluid moving backwards than he is moving forward. I also he doesn't have that dickhead mentality that you see from some of the game's premium run blockers. He's strong and has athleticism. He's not a bad run blocker. He knows who to block. But as far as how quickly he arrives and with how much force he arrives with, it's solid. It's good. It's nothing sensational. Unlike Shaq Mason, who is a dickhead, he's one of the biggest dickheads on the field that we've seen over the last few years. Like when he is pulled on the move, especially in his prime Patriots days, like he was a heat-seeking missile in their gap run scheme. And he's still been a very good player. He hasn't quite been that all-pro caliber player that he was in New England. And Belichick's always been one of those coaches that trades guys away a year too early rather than a year too late. Theoretically, this would be that year too late for Shaq Mason. Belichick's not always right, though. And I thought Mason was still really good last year. And I expect him to be really good in both phases here for the Texans. He is an incredibly strong player in pass protection, though his feet can let him down at times. His anchor's really good. It is worth noting that most offensive linemen aren't going to be as efficient when they go from having Tom Brady to the next guy, whoever the next guy might be. Tom Brady is the most offensive line-friendly quarterback that I've ever watched, certainly, for a lot of those reasons we described earlier when it comes to pocket presence and navigating angles and helping your linemen set up blocks and continue to sustain blocks. Also, more of a gap run blocker than a wide zone type of blocker. So will he grade out as a run blocker quite as well? Now kind of for the first time leaving a gap blocking scheme to go to like a wide zone situation. It's going to be something to keep an eye on. And if Shaq Mason's run block grade drops and PFF grades aren't God, but if you see it go down to the 50s or the low 60s for the first time in years, the scheme fit might be the reason for that, but I'm not really expecting it. He's athletic enough and tough enough and smart enough to at least be a good run blocker here, if not a studly run blocker. And then you got Titus Howard on the right tackle position, who's kind of a poor man's Laramie Tunsil in terms of, has all of the traits and is really fluid and sound going backwards. He's not quite as efficient and not quite as strong, not nearly as strong, honestly, as Laramie Tunsil, because I do think when Titus Howard struggles, it is getting exposed against those wide nine bull rushers where he can let him into his chest and not anchor the best against, the Max Crosbys and Myles Garretts and Micah Parsons of the world. But really smooth feet, handles counter moves quite well. And the nice thing about Titus Howard is he was always going to be a project, drafted in the first round. Started slow, as was kind of expected, but he's gotten better every single year, and you can honestly expect that he's going to continue to get better as he looks to earn a big contract here. Don't be surprised if his contract comes in somewhere in the range of what Jawan Taylor got for the Kansas City Chiefs, close to $20 million. It's the going rate for a quality starter at the position, and I think the Texans expect him to become that by season's end. It's a big year for Titus Howard, but I think he can live up to it, and certainly not a player I'm worried about here. I'd like to see them reach an extension with him. Now, you got to keep those guys healthy because their depth is not great. They have some tackles. Greg Little, who for Miami last year actually played very well at left tackle for like 4 straight weeks. So I think as a backup left tackle, he can be that kind of swingman on the inside and just be okay at that for what he is. Right side play has been where he really struggles. And then Charlie Heck is a good backup right tackle and is a pretty damn technically proficient pass protector. He's just a very limited athlete. So you do have some decent tackle depth. Austin Deculus as well was a day 3 pick out of LSU who started 1 million games for a championship caliber team. But the interior depth, I'm not a fan, man. I do think it's going to be a bit of a competition at center, and you have some names. You know, Michael Dieter started a lot of games for Miami, but hasn't started them well. You have Scott Kessenberry, who started a lot of games for the Texans last year, and that was a nightmare situation. I don't know if he'll make the team after the tape he put out last year. And then Jimmy Morrissey, I'm putting the eyes next to him because, I don't know, I thought he was a good value when they got him late in the draft a year ago. I wouldn't be totally floored if he challenged Juice Scruggs for that role. Scruggs was a 2nd-round pick, so he's going to get the benefit of that job. But he's the one guy where I guess keep an eye on, even though, you know, he's a 7th-round pick a year ago that has played, I think, like 40 snaps for this team. And then Jarrett Patterson as well. Decent athlete, a lot of experience playing center and guard at Notre Dame, but really lacks play strength, and I don't see him being a guy that really threatens for starting job at least this year. Now, Notre Dame is one of those offensive line programs where you kind of want to just grab as many of these guys deep into your roster as you can, because more often than not, these guys at least turn into a decent like NFL backup, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's Jarrett Patterson. But being a starter would definitely be a surprise. Beyond that, I do definitely like the skill position blocking that they're getting, which helps the run blocking, actually, believe it or not, a little bit, even though they rank 25th for run blocking. They go from 26th to 25th once you apply the skill block multiplier. Again, the full formula for all of these team rankings are in my description below. But Dalton Schultz, a very solid, good blocking tight end. Robert Woods is a premium blocker when he's on the field, and he can kind of play that Cooper Kupp role, for this, you know, Niners staff coming over, the Jawan Jennings role, a down blocker on toss runs, and, you know, can even, you know, block safeties and weak side linebackers in the stretch run game. Nico Collins, a very big-bodied, willing blocker on the outside. I liked some of the big blocks we saw from Troy Hairston on tape last year, too. The fullback, Andrew Beck's been an H-back in these systems for a while, so they do have a lot of different skill blockers that are going to do a good job there. But overall, you know, you do have your concerns here. Center and left guard are going to be arguably, other than the wide receivers stepping up with those young players we talked about, center and left guard are going to be extremely critical pivot points for the offensive success of this team's season. If Juice Scruggs was a complete reach in the 2nd round and can't hold up against NFL play strength, and if Kenyon Green, God forbid, doesn't take a step forward next year, there will be weak spots on this offensive line for opponents to expose, and CJ Stroud's time to throw is going to have to be sped up, which is just a tough ask for any rookie quarterback, no matter what you want to say about them. Now, I'd rather have those issues at center and guard. I think Kenyon Green especially should be better in year 2. And you really have good talent around those guys. So they are still going to rank 16th. And like I said, if Scruggs and Green hit, at least in pass protection, this is a top 10 unit. And then run blocking would certainly shoot up as well, though you're a little bit capped by Tunsil and Howard. You know, those guys they aren't phenomenal run blockers. It's just not really who they are and what their play style is. But again, obviously a lot's going to pivot there on center and left guard. I do like the running back room. This is a group that they're going to rank in the top half of the league at, 15th in the league. Now, Dameon Pierce has got to stay healthy, and I almost put that, you know, red check on his player card here on the graphic because this is a guy that has that reckless abandon as a running style, and he takes a lot of hits. And part of that is it's not necessarily that he doesn't go down. I don't want my running backs to go down. It's that because he breaks so many tackles, it's, you know, you love it. You want a back that's going to be in the top 5 of the league in broken tackles and have these insane highlight runs and turn nothing into something as often as he does. But there's plays where, you know, the Mike Boones of the world, they're only getting hit once. Dameon Pierce on some of these runs is getting hit 4 or 5 times, and they're from safeties crashing downfield looking to drill him and knock the ball out. So, like, he's going to take a lot of hits, and his body takes a beating. So you hope he can stay healthy, and that's why I think the Devin Singletary signing is really a good one. He's a poor man's Dameon Pierce. He doesn't nearly have the size. Proportionally, he does, but he's 5'7". But he's super low to the earth like Dameon Pierce. He has phenomenal contact balance, and he is going to break a lot of tackles. Now, Pierce is just bigger and faster and more dynamic, but as far as rushing style, these guys are going to be interchangeable. And Singletary, he's been underrated for the Bills. He really has. They've been trying to replace him with Zach Moss and James Cook, and they couldn't get Singletary off the field because he just got better every year and ran with more physicality and honestly juice every year. He genuinely has one of the best jump cuts in the NFL. Doesn't get enough credit for that. So I like the duo. It is interesting. Neither of these guys are particularly fast, and this is a wide zone blocking scheme where the first thing you're going to look for is that speed to turn the corner. So, you know, it's going to be something to monitor. You know, Bobby Slowick. Really, this team with the offensive line and the running backs is built for gap running. So I am interested to see what their splits look like this year. Do they run their scheme no matter what? Or do they cater to their players a little bit more and go with some pin and pull and trap runs that these guys are going to be more efficient at? Just something to keep an eye on for sure. Now, they do bring in Mike Boone, who is more of that wide zone, stretch the corner type of runner. He's never really broken out. I think if it was going to happen, it would have happened in Denver last year, but he is here. Dario Gunbowale, I don't know if he's going to make the team. He's just kind of limited at this point. Jared Dokes, kind of redundant with Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary, who had kind of that, you know, bruising downhill running style. Again, Valladay is the guy I'm very interested in here. He has the speed to run this wide zone blocking scheme. So if he makes the team and they don't love what they have in Mike Boone and they really want to get to stretch runs, he might even get in those situations as well. And this is obviously a staff that has pumped out the Matt Breidas of the world and the Raheem Mosterts of the world. And they've shown that if they just get speed, and Jeff Wilson, if they just get speed at that position, they'll find ways to get you out into space where you can utilize it. 4.4 speed for Valladay, who was a talented player. He was my number 17 back in this class. I did have a draftable grade on him. So definitely someone to keep an eye on. Deep dynasty leagues, that kind of stuff. At least put him on your watch list if he makes the team, because he does kind of have a skill set that would fit the scheme and provide something that they don't necessarily have otherwise. On top of that, I do think you're getting a boost from CJ Stroud's mobility. He has some size and the potential to mix in read options, but if nothing else, in a Shanahan-style system like this, his threat as a play-action boot threat is going to be very valuable to prevent that backside edge from crashing down all the time. You do have to take him very seriously, because if you get him on a wide open naked boot, he'll take it for 10, 15 yards, and he has enough to like make, you know, a slot corner or an outside corner miss and, you know, turn those into 15, 20-yard runs. Like, he is an athlete in space. So let's recap the offense all together now. So they are going to rank 29th overall for offense, 28th in the passing game, and 24th in the run game. It's not going to be the worst offense in the NFL, but they really just don't have a lot of areas of true strengths, honestly. Like, other than that blindside pass protection, you know, like you might look at 24th for run game, 28th for passing game. How does that come out to 29th? It's because most of the offenses above them are either like much better in the run game or much better in the passing game, but maybe not quite as balanced, I suppose. I don't know. I think this offense is going to have its lumps, and you talk about them being currently slated number 2 in Vegas gambling odds to get that, one of those top picks, basically, they've got a lot to figure out offensively. They really do. I think we've covered where those weaknesses are. And hopefully that's something that throughout the year, quarterback, interior offensive line, wide receiver, hopefully those are spots that they can find some players and get some development as the year goes on. On top of that, we just have question marks about what the play calling and play designs and offensive coaching is going to look like, which is fair because we got a new 37-year-old offensive coordinator taking over who's never called plays before. So, could go up or down from there. But now we're going to flip over to the defensive side of the ball, and what DeMeco Ryans is going to be able to do with this group is going to be fascinating. But let's start with the defensive line. And anytime you add a guy like Will Anderson through the draft, there's going to be an influx of optimism, no doubt. But this team definitely still has a lot of work to do. But the addition of Will Anderson, along with some of these other pieces here, are going to kind of get them out of the gutter. And they're going to rank 24th for pass rush, which is certainly more respectable than where they've been the last couple of years. A little bit worse with run defense, ranking 27th. But let's start with Will Anderson, who I love that they drafted him. I mean, you can't draw it up any better with the Alabama to Alabama connection. With DeMeco Ryans' defense being, so predicated on stunts, specifically, as we previewed earlier in the show. And Will Anderson is the perfect stunt man, if you will. The two things that really can be utilized through stunts is, number one, crashing, and the other thing is looping. And crashing requiring that first step explosiveness, the length, and the power to push not just one player in front of you, but often to occupy two players so that another player can take advantage of those numbers and loop around, but also the ability to be the loop man. So when you have an explosive player like Sheldon Rankins, maybe being that occupy man, you can have a player like Will Anderson with the bend and agility to change gaps and shoot into a schemed up lane. And that's before you even get into what Will Anderson can do to win on his own right. That power out wide in a wide 9 alignment, which he's going to get to play basically infinitely more often than he did at Alabama, where they were doing the stupid 3-3-5, playing him as a 4-eye, where he can't really get to the ability to convert speed to power because he's playing in such tight areas at Alabama. And I wish I could show you all this film, but the SEC doesn't want you to see Will Anderson film, so take it up with them. But essentially, Will Anderson is, for a variety of reasons, the perfect fit for the Houston Texans, and they can craft this defense around him. He's the obvious pick for Defensive Player of the Year. He's the favorite for a reason. I think he's got a very good shot at it. I think you're going to get probably close to double-digit sacks when you factor in the additional, free rush looks that he's going to get thanks to this scheme, on top of the actual pressures and sacks that he's going to create for himself from his power. And then I think he just continues to get better from there, man. Like, he still needs to develop his pass rushing tool belt. He very much likes to go speed to power, as a lot of these highly recruited 5-star big school guys, Jadeveon Clowney was this way. Chase Young was this way. Myles Garrett was this way. All guys that won off of physical tools at the college level that, with the right work ethic and coaching, can really put it all together and be that true generational type of talent. And as a player, size-wise, athleticism-wise, play strength-wise, I see a lot of Khalil Mack in his game, and I really wouldn't be stunned if you get something like that out of Will Anderson's career here in Houston. So you get to build around that, which is fantastic, but there is still a lot of building to do. Your second best pass rusher right now, maybe arguably your best pass rusher right now, depending on how good Will Anderson just is right away. But Jerry Hughes, the ageless wonder at this point, had a 58 pressure, 9-sack season last year, and I don't think you can just write him off that he can't repeat that. If he can do that at 34 years old, why can't he do it at 35? Now, obviously, that could drop off at any moment, and very well that may be this year. But there's still a very good chance, again, in a scheme that fits his skill set very well, as that stunt man. He's very quick on his feet, even at his age. He's going to get some manufactured sack looks as well off of some schemed up pressure. Now, there is a difference between Jerry Hughes and Will Anderson as run defenders, where Will Anderson has excellent play strength and gap discipline coming from Nick Saban's defense, whereas Jerry Hughes at this point in his career, I mean, he's always been a lighter player, and he's never been some sensational run defender either, but, you know, as far as holding up against a tackle and, you know, setting a strong edge, that's not really his game. He's a good backside defender. He can shoot gaps and splash into the backfield, but that's why Jonathan Grenard is listed as a rotational starter here next to Jerry Hughes. And Grenard, you know, year 2 was outstanding for him, where he was one of the most efficient pass rushers in the NFL. But year 3, last year, when they really needed a number 2 guy to step up, he couldn't do it. Now, he dealt with some health issues, and maybe he can get back to that kind of really high, like he was really projecting as a quality starter after his second season, and we don't feel that way about him now. But what he did accomplish in year 3 was show some really outstanding run defense. And if you want a guy to play early downs for Jerry Hughes at his age, so he's not an injury risk and he doesn't have to hold up against the run, something we just described he's not the best at, you know, Jonathan Grenard, closer to 260, he can hold up really well, and he showed the physicality and instincts to play the run really well. So you've got a nice trio rotation there. I think all 3 of these guys will play over 500 snaps, especially Will Anderson, might get up to 1,000. And then, you know, Jacob Martin gets brought back here. And Martin was awesome in 2021. In fact, we talked about him in the Jets deep dive last year, I believe is where he went. Obviously a ridiculously deep edge group for the Jets. But we talked about how much he stood out for the Houston Texans when prepping for their deep dive last year. So you bring him back just a year later, and why can't you get something from Jacob Martin? I think he's a really good 4th edge player to have. He'd be the best 4th edge on a lot of teams, especially as a pass rusher where he's got bend and pass rush moves, can even convert some speed to power. So you're pretty deep at edge, but unless Will Anderson is a game wrecker right away, which is very difficult to be that like true number 1 right out the gate. So, you know, it's a good group for sure, but it's not an overwhelming force, if you will. You continue to have some interesting depth, though. I mean, really, this is right there with a team like the Jets. Not a coincidence. These Robert Salah, D'Amico Ryan defensive lines are always deep like this. But they bring in Chase Winovich, another guy that is just really quick off the ball, had a really productive rookie season for the Patriots, but has kind of fallen out of favor with NFL coaching staffs. I don't know if it's because of a lack of discipline against the run or off-field or what the deal is. Maybe it's just injuries. But he's had a complete falling from grace, but he has shown that he can play in the NFL. And then Dylan Horton in the 4th round. We're going to talk about Horton with Kollmann here in, I don't know, 20 minutes or so when we get to the interview, but he was an awesome pick in the 4th round. Another guy that I think can be a good run defender right out the gate. Another player that was forced to play as like a 4-eye technique in a 3-3-5 front, which is a really difficult ask for a 265-pound edge player. But he did have to learn how to take on double teams and really play the run well from that spot, and he held up very well at TCU. A very talented player who I've felt really was in a similar mold with guys like Isaiah Foskey and Keon White as players that should have been 3rd or 4th round picks, and some of those other players went in the 2nd round. Horton falls to the 4th. I think they stole value there. Might not get on the field a ton as a rookie, but if he does, I think he's going to be a good rotational player. They also picked up Ali Gay, a big, strong guy. I can only imagine was highly recruited to LSU, but kind of fell off after some hype early in his career, but did show some good strength, setting a firm edge in the run defense. And there's even some more bodies there, but, you know, I'd be surprised if anyone else made the team with how deep this group is. But you get to the interior, and it's fine. It's not as bad as the last 2 teams, I'll say that. You know, Malik Collins is an underrated player. He's a very diverse, capable pass rusher. He has the ability to rush with a bull rush, but he also has spin moves and swim moves. You know, he had a career year as a pass rusher last year. I don't know how much better he's going to get. He kind of keeps inching forward a couple pressures every year, a couple extra pressures every year, it feels like. But I like what he brings to the table on third downs. He's just kind of a handful and a really good number 2 rusher, but again, not some, he's not DeForest Buckner or Chris Jones out there. And then as a run defender, he can splash into the backfield, but not much of an anchoring gap discipline type of run defender, as with Sheldon Rankins, who's actually very similar to Malik Collins. Honestly, both these guys right at about 300 pounds, so not the most overwhelming power, but both incredibly quick. Both bring a variety of pass rush moves and both splash as run defenders, but don't bring that down consistency as far as maintaining their gap, taking on double teams, especially at these guys' size. You're not really going to ask these guys to do that. But, 2 solid starters on the inside. It's better than some teams can say, but it's also nothing overwhelming. Again, that's a theme for this team as a whole. You get to the depth, and I do think Roy Lopez is going to get a significant amount of snaps, probably rotating with Sheldon Rankins most notably, because he has some of that anchoring ability to hold up earlier in the down against the run, and he's done that for a couple years now for the Texans. He's solid. He doesn't grade out all that well, as a lot of these nose tackles don't, because that ask is just so ridiculously difficult. I mean, even guys like Vita Vea, Grover Stewart, they don't always get the best PFF grades against the run, but you load up the tape and it's well, he did his job holding, if you only give up a yard against a double team and you open up space for the linebacker, or you prevent the guy from climbing to the second level, you did your job. So, not that Roy Lopez is Vita Vea or Grover Stewart, but he can do some of that stuff. Hassan Ridgeway has just been a very sound 4th, 5th balanced rotational defensive tackle. I don't mind that pickup at all. And then you got a couple of rookies from last year, Kurt Hinish, who actually outsnapped Thomas Booker. Both guys got on the field in what was a bad D-line, but both struggled. Thomas Booker was a 5th-round pick, a good athlete. I think they can do some interesting stuff with him. They are going to need some guys to be the occupy man, as I described earlier. Thomas Booker is a lighter, quicker guy with a good first step. He doesn't rush with a lot of power. I'd like to see him beef up in the weight room a little bit before you ask him to do this. But if you wanted a guy that can line up as a 4-eye technique and kind of throw himself into both the guard and the tackle, while Will Anderson can loop inside, that'd be a good role for Thomas Booker to kind of be a useful player while he continues to develop. But overall, his down-to-down play is not going to give you much. So the interior definitely holding this group back. But it is worth noting, I've said that about Niners defensive lines in the past. Granted, they had Eric Armstead, who's the ultimate, 4-eye, 3-tech type of dude. But they, even with the Jets, they definitely prioritize depth on the edge and utilizing the scheme to really make up for a lack of a true dominating nose tackle. So, on paper, it's not the most impressive group, but I do think that's where some of those defensive coaching rankings are gonna, help contribute to making this defensive line even bigger strength. So 24th again for pass rush and 27th for run defense. Let's talk about this linebacker group that, similar to the edge group, is one of the deeper linebacker groups in the league. Not so top heavy, but they're gonna rank 12th for me for linebacker run defense, and then 25th for linebacker coverage. Look, Denzel Perriman, straight up, one of the most underrated players in the league. And I talk about him with Brett Kollmann, the fact that he got a 1-year veteran minimum contract. It just doesn't match the film. He should be getting a legitimate contract extension. I don't know, there's a Panther on the screen right now. So, for example, Shaq Thompson. Denzel Perriman's just as good as Shaq Thompson, or CJ Mosley, if you want a Jets comp. He's a legitimate, good starting linebacker in the NFL. Much better in run defense, but he's great in run defense. He is always, going back to college, had that throwback mentality. He wants to hit you, but he's not Vontaze Burfict. He's not getting ejected from games and, suspended because he's dirty. He's just really physical. And he's actually smarter in coverage than you'd expect. He finds himself navigating his ways into passing lanes, doesn't always take the cheese on play action. He's far from perfect and doesn't have the best lateral agility and change of direction to really be rangy and cover a lot of ground, but he's smart and he understands the game and he understands how opposing offenses are trying to attack him. So I really love this signing. It's one of my favorite things that the Texans did this offseason. He's going to be, I can only imagine, a captain of the defense. And DeMeco Ryans is going to freaking love this guy because he's going to oversee everything. And they've been, throwing snaps at Christian Kirksey. Denzel Perryman is what the NFL seems to think Christian Kirksey is. And Kirksey's made, I think, like 4 times the money Perryman has made in his career, which is a fucking joke, by the way. Kirksey's bad. Kirksey's really bad. And I don't think he needs to make the team, honestly. I'm not trying to, slander the Kirksey family name here, but there's a lot of depth here, and, we'll get to that later. But I do think they will give the job to Christian Harris, just kind of because why not? You have DeMeco Ryans has done a phenomenal job. Phenomenal is honestly selling it short, the amount of development that the Niners have had with that linebacking group. Fred Warner, of course, a 3rd-round pick. Dre Greenlaw, I think either, what was Greenlaw? 5th-round pick. Azeez Al-Shaair just got a contract with the Tennessee Titans. All guys kind of in the Christian Harris mold, where you get an athlete, you teach him the game. DeMeco sees this position in a way that very few humans do. And if he can, from one Alabama linebacker to another, infuse some of that knowledge into him, a guy that is still relatively new to the position, was a safety, and, kind of played a unique role at Alabama, didn't play a ton last year for the Texans. The sky is the limit. This is a guy with 4.4 speed. He loves to hit. He can run. He can truly move in space. He is the ideal 3rd-round linebacker selection. And, he may never be a dominant run defender. I think his discipline and ability to read his keys and stuff can certainly improve, but you don't want to put on too much weight because you'll lose that ridiculous speed advantage that he has. But as a complement to Denzel Perryman, you couldn't ask for a better physical option, just with the speed, because you can have Perryman thump and try to keep Harris on the backside where he doesn't have to take on guards and centers in the run game. So really excited to see what Christian Harris can do here in year 2. And it's more like it's all about the tools and the coaching. There's not a ton on his tape that gets you overly excited. There's some flashes for sure. And there's no doubt that he's got a long way to go. He's graded for me as a 66. So entering the year, he's a massive question mark as a starter, but there's really no reason not to start him, knowing that what he could be with the, with the playing time and the development, what he could be in a couple of years. There's no reason not to play him. And then they signed a couple of guys. They signed Corey Littleton, who actually had a bounce back year for Carolina last year. Talk about a guy that got a contract, whereas Denzel Perryman somehow can't get. Corey Littleton got a big contract from the Rams, got like $10 million a year. They moved on from him pretty quickly. I think he played 2 years there. For the Raiders. He left the Rams, went to the Raiders, struggled in a different system. But, kind of regressed back to the mean, if you will, for the Panthers. He's a solid starter. And if Harris is a nightmare out there, you have a guy that similarly can be a nice complement to Perriman. And honestly, if Littleton was the full-time starter, these grades would be a little bit better, obviously. But I'm not expecting a significant amount of playing time for Littleton because I think they're going to be smart about developing Christian Harris. I'm sure they will rotate, and this has been almost a frustrating rotation at times with how much depth they have. But I'm expecting Perriman and Harris to be the snap leaders for their base nickel defense. We talked about Kirksey. And then you have Jake Hansen, who earned a lot of time last year, was familiar with Lovie Smith specifically because he was with him in Illinois, so very familiar with the system, but showed that he can play in the NFL. If nothing else, Jake Hansen is a reason not to keep Christian Kirksey because they're basically the same player. Physically limited, but physical run defenders for what it's worth. Henry To'oTo'o as well. I compared him to Blake Martinez coming out. A really stiff mover. I don't ever see him being, honestly, even a 3-down player in an ideal situation. I know Blake Martinez made it work for a year for the Giants, and Green Bay had him starting forever, so he racked up tackle stats, but really Blake Martinez should have been more of an LB3 in a realistic analysis of his game. And I think Henry To'oTo'o is a very similar player. Secure tackler, pretty good run diagnostics, going to maintain his gap discipline, but just the stiffness is really going to limit his play in the modern NFL. Neville Hewitt gets brought in through free agency, has had some good games for the New York Jets. So they look at what he has done in a similar system for the Jets and say, you can come in and compete. We'll see if he makes the team. Garrett Wallow, a really athletic 5th-round pick out of TCU, has shown flashes. And then Blake Cashman as well. Talk about, the Jets connection. The Jets drafted him, and he just has never been able to stay healthy. I know Blake Cashman can play because he's had good games when he's been out there. Even showed some flashes for the Texans last year. But yeah, it's just health for him. The shoulder, he's a slender player. The contact and physicality of the position's been a problem for him. And if he could ever be healthy, I would believe in him. But that's probably enough time spent on Blake Cashman at this point. So yeah, it's a very interesting linebacking room. And I don't think it's going to hold this team back. You don't have any superstars in this group, and maybe someday Christian Harris can be that. But this is going to be much more about Denzel Perriman being really a leader for the defense and a tone setter in the front seven, and Christian Harris's development. Everything else is just kind of, it kind of is what it is. It's a lot of basic run defending linebackers for the most part. And then we'll wrap up the roster review with the secondary here. Another group where it's like very deep, very balanced. They're not going to be a problem. But unless Derek Stingley breaks out in year 2 and reaches his upside, you probably don't have any superstar players in this secondary. And Stingley's got a ways to go before he's at that point. In fact, he had a lot of struggles in his rookie season. Now, you can see the athletic tools, the flashes. There were dominant man-to-man coverage snaps on his film, but a lot of coverage busts not a lot, but several coverage busts in zone, and just some loose coverage. Like, the first thing I'm telling Derek Stingley is, dude, this is the NFL. You have to stay on your man. And when you talk about route squeeze, being that, not just reactionary ability when the receiver begins his separation to squeeze that area tightly, but also when I describe route squeeze, it's don't allow unnecessary yardage. So if you're covering a deep dig against cover 3 and you're looking at the quarterback and your man is not the first read and he begins that dig route, you still have to go and cover the guy. You can't be lagging in your coverage because it's the NFL and that quarterback's gonna snap his head around and he's going to target that man. So there's just a lot of coaching points with Derek Stingley that need to come along that I'm not going to say I'm worried about it, but he was a little bit more underwhelming in his rookie year than I would have hoped. I was a big Derek Stingley guy. It's probably unlikely that he's going to be as good as Sauce at this point. These guys are always going to be linked together because Sauce went 4th and Stingley went 3rd. The Texans chose to pick Stingley, and obviously if they got a redo, they would take Sauce Gardner. But ultimately, I still think Derek Stingley can be a dominant corner in this NFL, in the NFL, a true number 1. And frankly, his physical tools are still more than what Sauce Gardner brings to the table. But Sauce is just, you talk about route squeeze and IQ at the position. It's a long way to go for Derek Stingley before he's where Sauce is as a rookie. But we don't always need to tie these guys together. I think Stingley should be at the top of everybody's breakout lists. Getting him with DeMeco Ryans, who's going to get him in a lot more man-to-man. That was another thing when the Texans drafted him, by the way, was how is he going to play in a zone-heavy Lovie Smith defense when he's first things first, he wants to go man-to-man. And the zone stuff was going to have to take some time and come along. Well, it's not that they won't go zone with DeMeco Ryans, but a lot of times it's going to be more man-match situations than he was getting with Lovie Smith's defense. But they'll also run a lot more cover 1. So I'm really excited to see Stingley with DeMeco Ryans, with an improved pass rush, an obvious breakout candidate, and a big pivot point for this defense as far as how much success they can have this season. But you got Steven Nelson on the opposite side, sound veteran corner, getting up there in age, but had another good year last year. He's just your prototype number 2. He's not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, but really smart player, good quickness, can run every coverage in the book, including man coverage. So you're not going to complain about him being your number 2, but you're not going to be all that excited about it either. In the slot, I'm curious to see who they go with here, because how much longer are we going to continue to sleep on Tavierre Thomas as a football economy, as NFL coaching staffs? You know, David Culley and Lovie Smith, they eventually came around to playing Tavierre Thomas. And when he got out there, he's been arguably their best corner. If not, you know, Steven Nelson's been pretty good at times, but, you know, Tavierre Thomas has had outstanding games, really physical, big-bodied slot corner. Now you have Desmond King here, who has been a mainstay as a starting slot corner in the NFL now, it feels like, for almost 10 years. And to me, Tavierre Thomas has more athleticism to run more man coverage, whereas Desmond King would be much better. Like the Niners, for example, were about 41% cover 3 last year. Desmond King has had his best seasons with going back to his time with the Chargers, when they were a Gus Bradley cover 3 style defense. So, you know, if they feel like they need to be in zone a lot more, Desmond King could actually have a really, I mean, he was pretty good last year in a cover 2 system, and they played him outside because it's for a slot corner like him who's not fast, you can run cover 2 and do the soft squat zone stuff and kind of lurk and be a ball hawk out there. You can't really run north and south in man coverage, though. So for this defense, he's definitely going to be back into the slot. And in his own right, could have a really good year. So I think they are set in the slot. They might just rotate these guys. I think they should. They're both very good players. And Tavierre Thomas is really one of the more underrated defensive backs in the league. Kid out of Ferris State has made a name for himself. And then you even have Shaquille Griffin. So you're like 5 deep of starting caliber corners. Griffin definitely fell out in Jacksonville after earning a massive contract for his play with the Seattle Seahawks. Now, again, the Seattle cover 3 rejuvenation is a theme here. They're doing a great job of identifying players that have had success in cover 3 heavy systems and putting them in here. I expect that we see a lot of cover 3. And if something happens to Stingley, which unfortunately, let's face it, has been an issue for the last few years, is him staying healthy. Oh, Steven Nelson getting older. If something happens, you got a guy that can plug right in, and you're really not missing much of a beat with Shaq Griffin. And, you know, he had a falling out, but graded as a 75 after that falling out, could certainly get back to being a quality starter in a scheme that fits him much better. I don't think that's even out of the likely range of outcomes for him. They even have Darius Phillips, Kendall Sheffield, some guys that have played in the NFL. You don't need them because they're already 5 deep ahead of that. But a really impressively deep group of corners without a star corner. And then I am truly in love with this safety duo. It's one of my favorite things about this Texans team. And I loved seeing, not that they weren't creative with Hufanga and Jimmy Ward, but Hufanga to me doesn't have the range of like Jalen Petrie here. And they were a little bit more limited in San Francisco as far as rotating those safeties up and down. Jimmy Ward played a substantial amount of his snaps in the slot last year, but he is awesome as a free safety as well. And Jalen Petrie now, who my pro comp for him was Jimmy Ward, well, there you go. You have 2 of them. I think in this system, Petrie is going to be utilized just as Jimmy Ward has been used in San Francisco. It's going to be so seamless with this staff coming over. And I have big expectations for Petrie, who definitely came on late last season. He did end up with, I think, 3 interceptions, 5 pass breakups. Just a very streaky rookie season, which is totally fine for a young second-round safety. But definitely showed better tape as the year went on. And one of my favorite players to watch in last year's draft. I couldn't imagine a better situation for him with this scheme and this mentor ahead of him. And Jimmy Ward, I mean, between him, Denzel Perriman for $1.5 million, and then Jimmy Ward for 2 years, $12 million. That's absurd value. Jimmy Ward should be making $10 million. He is a top 10-ish safety in the NFL. Not like the most rangy or dynamic cover player, but super smart. He is fast. A guy that has a ton of slot corner experience, so he can go man-to-man. He has the range to play free safety, is great. Insert classic TFG rant about slot corners thriving in quarters, split safety defenses. Jimmy Ward, cut and paste everything I've ever said about that. He can drop, into a quarters coverage, flip his hips, convert into man with I don't want to say with the best of them, but extremely well. So, yeah, I'm very optimistic. Can't grade Petrie too high because of some of the ugly coverage moments he did have last year. But again, definitely answered a lot of those questions as the year went on, and the arrow is absolutely pointing up for him. Your safety depth is fine. Eric Murray got a massive contract from the former regime for some reason, so that's basically why he's here. He's fine. Converted slot corner in his own right, and, could, I guess, function better in this system theoretically because of all the things we've said about slot corners making good safeties in a split safety quarters heavy system. MJ Stewart as well, a slot corner that's moved to safety. Stewart actually played really well towards the end of last year for the Texans. I've always appreciated his game. He's very physical and aggressive. I like that as a backup because he's going to make some plays. As a starter, he'd probably be a little bit more boom or bust. Kind of a little bit like DeMarco Helms, for those that remember my analysis on him, who went to the Falcons in the draft. Brandon Hill as well. Hey, do you remember ever me talking about slot corners making the switch to safety and defenses where they run a lot of quarters? Well, Brandon Hill, listed as a safety, played, I think, 80+% of his snaps as an actual slot corner in Pittsburgh's defense. He is just like Jimmy Ward coming into the league, 5'10", 195, loves to run, loves to hit, needs to learn how to cover. But as a guy that can really, your coaching points are going to be, these are all the same player. Eric Murray, MJ Stewart, Brandon Hill, Jalen Petrie, these guys all were slot corners in college. Jimmy Ward was a slot corner in college. So, they are going with that approach with this safety group, the rotational ability. One snap, you're a free safety. One snap, you're playing the post. The next snap, you're covering a tight end or a slot receiver. They are extremely versatile and rotational in the sense that you can move up or down. Not so much that, it's not like Eric Murray is going to be taking snaps from Jalen Petrie. More so, Ward and Petrie, or if any of these guys have to play, can come in wherever. Tyree Gillespie is also an athlete I liked coming out in the draft, but this is his third or fourth team at this point, and he's only been in the league for 3 years, so there's clearly a lack of something there with him. Graylin Arnold, I'd be very surprised if he made it. But I do enjoy this secondary. As a concept. I love how these guys' skill sets play off each other and how versatile they're going to be. But outside of Jimmy Ward being, a plus coverage player, but not, Jesse Bates or anything like that, you just don't have any difference makers at the moment. And then hopefully Petrie and Stingley can really reach that upside. And you can walk into 2024 feeling like you really have the backbone building blocks of your secondary. That's going to be the big goal for this staff and this roster as they get through the year. So they rank 23rd for me for DB coverage. Again, very respectable, but it is that lack of high-end talent, at least right now, that is going to quote-unquote hold them back, I suppose. I do love what these guys bring to the table as run support guys. Not going to get too far into it, but Jimmy Ward, Jalen Petrie, those guys are maniacs coming downhill. Petrie would have gotten an A grade for me, but he missed way too many tackles last year, so he's got to clean that up. But again, those guys are spitting images of each other, and they're not going to let you get away with a lot of stuff after about 5 yards, and they will help this run defense quite a bit. So to recap the defense as a whole, kind of similar to the offense where they're balanced and solid, but the lack of being stand-out-ish on either side of the ball, where they rank 20th for both pass defense and run defense. I think you have a very deep competent NFL roster, which is more than the Texans have been able to say for 2 years. You have a lot of different skill sets for D'Amico Ryans to utilize. And I'm excited to see this staff get to work and find out who their key players are, find out who their key role players are, see what young players can step up, because the player development and finding diamond in the rough guys for the Niners has been really efficient. And I expect there to be some guys emerging through the woodworks for this Texans team. Can't wait to see who it is, let alone the development of premium talent like, Will Anderson and Derek Stingley, Jalen Petrie. So for your final recap, 29th for offense, 23rd for defense. I like their special teams as well. They got a good kicker in Kaimi Fairbairn. I also think the depth with the linebacking group and the defensive backs is really going to play into their favor. I think they're going to have a chip on their shoulder from a coverage unit perspective. Don't love their punter. That's the one thing, kind of keeping them from being tied with the one team that got an elite grade, basically. But, I'm expecting this to be a very good special teams, which is going to give that overall a little bump. So thank you for sticking this out. I know it's going to be a long one, a lot of stuff to talk about with all these moving pieces. A very fun team, but let's look at their schedule. And I forgot to do this for the first 2 deep dives here. I had it on my list of notes of things to upgrade for the series this year compared to last year, but I have added 2 more categories of the win probability, if you will. Felt like that was necessary. But the one thing I will say about the Texans' win projection is their schedule is very generous, and I think that potentially played into their decision to move up and get. Really, for me, it was moving up to get CJ Stroud, even if they picked him first. I think they were always going to take Will Anderson. But I think they felt like, okay, we take Stroud, we play our own division, which isn't the best by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it's the worst in the AFC by far. And then they get to play the NFC South, which is probably the worst division. And, well, NFC West is up there too. But they have that. They have the last place schedule, so they get teams like Denver. And I think there's a lot of games here where they're going to be, 3.5, 4-point underdogs. This is going to be a very competitive, balanced team. While they don't have a lot of massive strengths where they can overwhelm you in any one area, they also don't have massive weaknesses, really, that other than maybe receiver. And we'll see how the line goes there. But overall, I don't think there's going to be a lot of spots where certain matchups will be able to just dominate the Texans. I think they'll be in a lot of games, a lot of close games, and then you hope CJ Stroud can pull through in a few of those. Getting over 6.5 wins, it's going to be tough, especially because I don't think they're going to start particularly strong. It is possible. If I had to bet this, I would still go under, but for my 30th ranked team, I've got them projected a little over 5.5 wins. It's certainly not horrible, and I think the ease of this schedule certainly helps them out there. But that's going to do it for everything on my end. I do ask you guys, please do hit that like button, drop your comments down below, but do not go anywhere. We still have a 30-minute interview with the one and only Brett Kollmann that you guys are going to absolutely enjoy. So we're going to turn it over to that and say our goodbyes now. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in about 3 or 4 days for our next deep dive. Peace out. And now I am so thrilled to welcome in our first guest of the deep dive series, the one and only Brett Kollmann, who's been a very busy man, not just with his own YouTube channel, but also doing stuff film-wise with the LA Chargers, NFL Films, and obviously the Bootleg Football podcast on top of all that. So thanks, Brett, for taking time to come on today. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. There's no actual off season for NFL content creators, so still kind of deep in the thick of it and just trying to make it to preseason.
Absolutely, man. So you grew up a Texans fan, and I think you still will say that you're a Texans fan. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so my dad lived in Houston when I was growing up, and then he went to Chicago, and so early 2000s, I picked up the Texans from the very beginning because that's where my dad lived. And then he went to Chicago, and I was like, okay, well, they're in the NFC. They can be my NFC team. And I still curse my dad every day for not like working in Boston or something successful. So, but Texans were my first love. They've always been my first love. I took a kind of couple year break because of everything going on. I was like, I just can't put emotional energy into this team right now. But they've made so many good moves and cleaning up the culture there that I'm working my way back in. I think I'm part of the family again. But God, there was a 2-year stretch there where I just couldn't like morally support the organization. And I think
I
they got rid of the right people.
I can't even imagine your heartstrings getting pulled out like that. So that does take me to kind of my first question is I mean, obviously they made this huge splash on draft day that I can't say nobody saw coming, because didn't someone predict this trade for the Will Anderson, CJ Stroud thing? Maybe not.
It's so funny because like I thought there was no way in hell they were going to take Stroud. Everybody I had talked to, like even my connections in the Texans kind of orbit, right? That really are ingrained within the organization. Even they didn't know. Apparently, the only people that knew they were going Stroud was head coach and GM. That was it.
Yeah.
But like other people that worked not directly at that level in the front office, but other people that I know that are around the organization, like they all had no clue that was coming.
Wow.
Stroud's team didn't even know. Like obviously the other teams around Houston thought there was no way like that was ever going to happen. Like the other teams in the top 5 thought they were going Richardson or Anderson, because everybody knew that they had like an astronomical grade on Will Anderson. Nobody knew that was coming. So I when I declared that there was like no way it was happening, it was because everybody other than like 3 people on the face of the earth thought it wasn't going to happen. The Will Anderson thing was a little bit more predictable. Now, I didn't expect it to be a trade back up to 3, but
right.
I think most people were like, yeah, Will Anderson's a Texan in some way, shape, or form. They just happen to do it in the most entertaining way possible.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, because you bring a really interesting perspective on it, because obviously you have an emotional connection to the Texans when something big like that happens. But also you're an analyst, so you can look at the trade value and the decision. And I'm just curious, like, as a fan, were you excited about it? Do you regret them making the move? And then as an analyst, what do you think of giving up, potentially like, Caleb Williams for CJ Stroud is kind of what it boils down to.
I liked it because I don't think this team was going to be bad enough for Caleb Williams. I really don't. Like they've drafted so well, really since Caserio got there. They've drafted so much better that I feel like there's too much talent on the team for them to finish in the top 5 picks, which is what it's going to take to either get Caleb Williams at first or potentially have the ammo to get Caleb Williams at first.
Yeah.
And I think they knew that. They're like, we have too much young talent. Like we're going to be mid, but we're not going to be horrible. Like this is not a Arizona Cardinals or like maybe Bucks situation, right? And I think that's there is something to be said for the fact that I think the Texans don't get a lot of media coverage, and so people don't realize some of the talent they have. This is not going to be a bottom 3 team to me. It's really not. So if they were going to get a quarterback, it was going to be this year. Again, stunned beyond belief that it was Stroud, but I'm happy it was because I thought he was worth the pick. And he's a good kid, hard worker, deadly accurate. Like in terms of just like sitting in the pocket and throwing darts, he's everything you want, and I think that, does he have the ceiling of Anthony Richardson? No. Does he have, I would say, the floor of Bryce Young? Also, no. But it's very hard for me to imagine he's going to be a bad quarterback. Like, I think he's going to be a very solid, stable, easy to fall in love with franchise level quarterback. And there's probably only 8 to 9 of those in the league at any given time. And I think eventually he's going to be one of those. And you could win a lot of games with that.
Yeah, I think you and I are definitely in sync kind of with where we see him both right away and eventually. Like, I think he's going to be some cross between Jared Goff and Dak Prescott. Just kind of a
Yeah,
mishmash of their skill sets. I mean, the way he throws the ball and even the way just the kind of parts of the field he attacks, he is Jared Goff. Like literally just his mechanics, the way the ball
yeah,
travels through the air, the accuracy is just like
with
every
feet.
time
Like he's got
with
better
feet.
mobility.
Yeah. But not like, he's not insanely athletic, but yeah, he can move a little bit. So I went somewhere between Jared Goff with wheels and just Dak Prescott, but I think he's a little bit more overall arm talent than Dak, maybe. Although
He's
it's
one of
close.
those where it's like if you gave him to Kyle Shanahan, everybody'd be like, "Oh shit, like
Hmm.
they're gonna win the Super Bowl," you know. But it's
Yeah.
like you have a Niners style offense in Houston with some really exciting offensive line pieces and a really exciting running back piece and some receivers you believe in. Like it's not that far off to me. Like he's gonna hit the ground running a lot quicker than people think.
Yeah, it's going to be a nice, fresh territory for the Texans to have above competency at that position. It should be pretty good. There's definitely going to be some ups and downs in his rookie year, I would imagine, but it shouldn't take long for him to be in the top half of quarterbacks in the league. What did you think of the Slowick hire? Was that a surprise to you, or did you think he was ready?
I knew he was gonna get hired somewhere. I figured that was coming just because I had heard so many people that were just being like, this guy's going places, right? I don't know how long he's going to be in Houston because he seems to be on that kind of trajectory. We'll see. There's a bunch of other, kind of young offensive minds around the league. Ben Johnson, Kellen. Like, I think he's going to
Hmm.
be pretty soon here, maybe seen as one of those types where it's all right, 2 to 3 years in Houston, and then we're waving goodbye, and you're going to take over some other team. But
Yeah,
there's a lot of excitement around him, and I think that was another thing is like one of the things that brought me back in of like, okay, I can support this team again was bringing in D'Amico
yeah.
because D'Amico is like the ultimate leader of men. He's no nonsense. He's not going to tolerate a lot of the shit that was going on behind closed doors, a lot of it which is never made public. Um, he's not going to tolerate everything that was going on that made me just like lose faith in the leadership structure. And I
Hmm.
think that the D'Amico hire by itself is the most positive thing to happen to this franchise in over half a decade. And I don't think it's particularly close.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's almost lucky that like he played for the Texans because he was like probably, I mean, he was one or two in terms of this hiring cycle. And yeah, for where they were to get a coach like that, just like Pinocchio becomes a real boy again. It was
Yeah.
just such a saving grace. So yeah, things are definitely looking up. Now, I want to get into kind of the roster side of things a little bit more and start with this receiving group that has a complete mishmash of guys. You got Robert Woods, Nico Collins, and, oh my God, I can't think of a Houston kid's name, Tank Dell. You got
Mhm.
him coming into the mix. Amari Rogers showed some flashes. John Mechie, shout out to him. He's out there practicing now, fully recovered, it sounds like. So, what do you kind of imagine the target share to look like, and maybe just for like a little bit of like a fantasy football lens, who are one or two guys that you would put above the rest of this group? Because I don't think anyone truly stands out right now.
Eh, You know, I think it's going to be a very even distribution, especially with Stroud, because he's very much a point guard type quarterback, right? Um, his number one receiver is the one that's open. And
Hmm.
so, really, I think it depends on the roles that we think these guys are going to play in this offense. Again, if we're kind of projecting it out to a Niners Shanahan ish style offense, we're pretty sure that Robert Woods is either going to be the X or they're going to use him in like a Ben Skoranek type
Yeah.
of, inside receiver that can also block. The fact that he can do both of those things means that I don't entirely know which spot he's going to play, but they love the versatility. That's why they brought him in.
Hmm.
Mechie, I think, is probably going to be more of an inside receiver for them. And then Dell, I think, there are certain reps where for an X, it's less about blocking. It's more about just go get open and beat press and everything like that. We know Tank Dell can beat press. He's really good at
Yeah.
that. Otherwise, I think he'll be a Z. I don't think he's going to play inside for them just because I really don't want him running inside routes into linebackers.
Yeah.
he's just too small for that. But we know as an outside receiver, if we just need somebody to go break man coverage, he's going to do that. Then you got Nico Collins, who I think is going to lead them in explosives, maybe not in catches, maybe not in yards, but in terms of just go get a chunk, I think that's going to be Nico Collins. So they have this kind of like diverse set of skill sets that can all kind of play different spots. And I don't entirely know which guy's playing which spot yet. For fantasy purposes, if I had to order who I'm going after, first is going to be Robert Woods. Second would be Nico. Third, probably Tank Dell. And then fourth, Mechie, just until we see how far along he is in coming back, right? But if I really, really want to invest in the Texans offense, I'm just going to take Dameon Pierce because he's going to get fed like crazy.
Yeah. I don't see Devin Singletary, dethroning him or anything like that.
No.
I think the one guy that, as I've been doing like underdog drafts, the one guy that I've taken from this team, I think was Dalton Schultz, who I think is going to be a very steady force there. Yeah. So
yeah, he's going to be not even a top 10. I think he's going to be like a top 7 tight end.
Oh,
but
yeah.
like, especially
an
underdog, like I don't know about your drafts, but an underdog, like his ADP is shockingly low relative to what I think he's going to do. And I think it's because he's in Houston. And so people just write him off. But like,
yeah,
no, he's a really good tight end. And this is an offense that historically feeds tight ends. Like it's going to be Owen Daniels all over again.
Exactly. Yeah. And it like, not to go too deep into best ball strategy, but like he's going to give you that baseline and then you can throw some darts on some of those more explosive guys. So
you can go get like Jelani Woods or something like that in the 14th round and not care,
Yeah, totally. And then I want to talk a little bit about the hog mollies. Kenyon Green kind of struggled in his first year. Have you gotten a chance to kind of look at his film and maybe one or two areas that really led to his deficiencies last year and maybe some kind of coaching points that you'd like to see him improve on for next year?
Yeah, it was kind of a compounding issue. The first one was hand placement. And he gave up a lot of pressures, but there was like 4 sacks in particular that he gave up where it really came down to hands. There was either he's punching too high on the outside shoulder, and so the hand kind of slipped off the pad, and then he gave up his chest because he was coming in high and outside. There was another one against Hargrave where he kind of came in too wide, and you let Hargrave, get inside your chest, he's going to just rock you back. Mm-hmm. And he gave up 2 sacks against Washington, again, where maybe he thought he had more core strength than he did, and he just got taken for a ride like a blocking sled. And I think all of it was if your hands are coming in too wide and too high and you're giving up that chest, like you really have to just be strong as hell so that when you're clamping on the outside, they can't go left or right and they can't do all the swims and stuff. But like you got to take it and be able to re-anchor, and he just couldn't do it. So he's got to improve his core strength. He's got to improve his lower body strength, because if he can't do that, then he has to win on the punch. Like if you don't have the ability to re-anchor, you got to win on the punch. So I'm curious to see what he looks like this year, because if he gets stronger, he can get away with how he used his hands last year. If he didn't get stronger, they're going to have to readjust how he punches. He's going to have to come up more inside. But again, young player, still a lot of room to grow, but he learned some real tough lessons against the Yankees last year.
Yeah, that's to say the least. And then another guy is your boy, Juice Scruggs, who I think even you maybe a little bit when he came off the board in the second round, you were like, oh, Juice in the second round. All right. Definitely a shocker. I mean, I didn't see it like that early. I get the scheme fit, but what do you think like his kind of like ceiling is as a center?
I knew he wasn't getting out of the third round. I did not know he wasn't getting out of the second. So that one did surprise me a little bit, but I love Juice, man. He's a great guy, great, locker room leader, natural fit for that system. Like if you're running a lot of outside zone stuff and you're not getting John Michael Schmitz, like he's one of the better centers in this class at doing that, because he's really quick. He has a lot of like, not just lateral agility, but also lateral flexibility. Like the way he kind of opens up like when he's doing a bucket step and he really opens up that hip and gets width and depth, it's like, oh, okay, there's something there. And I think
Yeah.
that's why they took him, right? Is they're trying to build their offensive line for running outside zone, wide zone, whatever you want to call it. And you need to have a very quick, flexible, dare I say, undersized center to do that. Not to mention, like, there were some reps he went against Mozzie Smith where even though he's not the biggest guy in the world, like, he kind of clamped down and anchored there. And we're like, okay, he can survive against Mozzie, who's a freak. Like,
Yeah.
Maybe there's something there in terms of being able to handle, like, the big 340-pound nose tackles in the NFL one-on-one. So I think they took him specifically for that, not to mention, again, he's a great locker room leader. He knows how to call protections. And I think that if you're running this style of offense, you can't afford to have a bad center. So they were willing to take him a little bit earlier than projected just to make sure they got him. So from that standpoint, I totally understood it. But I agree, second was earlier than I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's just smooth. He's a really smooth center. I think he's going to be fine. You get a starting center at the end of the second round. You're not going to cry about it. So, very, very good. And then Derek Stingley as well. I think the PFF grade obviously wasn't great, and the PFF grade carries a lot of weight in today's football economy, if you will. What did you see from him? Do you think he truly struggled? Was it just your typical rookie corner mistakes? And then is there anything like technically for him that you would want to see him improve upon?
I just want him to get more aggressive. And when I watched his tape, he didn't give up any touchdowns, and he only gave up I use the term gave up loosely, plays of 20 plus yards. A lot of it was like, oh, he's zoning off and they ran a dig inside. Right. It's like, okay, it's not, he didn't really give it up. If I was going to say plays of 20 or more yards he gave up, it was really like 2. But on the plays that he did actually give up, whether he's in zone or he's in man, a lot of it was just, I think he's used to young college quarterbacks that when you're in phase, they're not going to throw the ball. And then even against Denver, and Russ had his struggles, he's hip to hip against Cortland Sutton, and he's like, cool, I took him away, I did my job.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, Cortland turns around, the ball's back shoulder, and you could see Derek like, what the?
You actually threw that?
You actually threw that? Like, it was like he was shocked that quarterbacks in the NFL can just throw against leverage and like hit a shoebox 40 yards down the field. And he had to like learn on the fly of like, oh, players are really good up here. I don't just have to be in phase. I have to like actually play through the entire rep because they're going to try me, whether it's good coverage or not. And so you could see him kind of learn that throughout his rookie year of like, yeah, these dudes are really good, and you gotta lock in every single rep. But I think that he's going to be better in year 2 because of that.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a big winner from getting D'Amico Ryans in there, like, and the improved pass rush. He's got to be at the top of everybody's breakout list for next year. I mean, I know Sauce got the spotlight in year 1, and he might never be as good as Sauce. That's pretty high territory, but Stingley, I think. Definitely almost being slept on at this point. So I'm excited to see what he can do this year. Back to the draft. I know we're kind of bouncing all over the place, but who is a day 3 pick that you think makes the biggest impact? And I think I know what your answer is going to be, but you take the floor.
It's got to be Dylan Horton.
Yeah.
They got him in the 4th round, which was like the opposite of Juice Scruggs, right? Like, I didn't think Horton was getting out of the 3rd. And to see him go to the 4th, I was like, that's just pure value. I don't think even they thought they were going to get him that late. I love him as a player. Again, he's a defensive end in the Big 12. So it's a lot of 3-man rushes, a lot of trying to rush from like a loose 5 technique. And you're not getting any sort of help schematically in terms of getting like quality rush reps. But he was still winning, one with power, one with speed. He's not like the loosest guy in the hips, but he's not what I would qualify as stiff. The Ole Miss kid was stiff.
Yes.
The Ohio State kid was stiff.
Yeah.
Foskey was stiff. Like, Horton, I think, had better hips than all those guys. So
agreed.
I really like him a lot. He kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Brandon Graham in terms of build. He's a little bit taller than Brandon Graham, but that wide, thick, inside outside versatility type of guy. Doesn't have devastating length, but does have a lot of power.
Yeah.
I like him. I think he's going to get pretty significant reps.
Yeah. He has some power in there for sure. And like you said, you didn't get a ton of opportunities to actually see him come from like a wide 9 and actually let it loose. But he also has that like slow burn rush approach where he's really good at just kind of like using his length to keep his distance and then finding, which little lane he wants to kind of, use those hips and get slippery. In that way, reminds me a lot of like Cam Thomas last year. Who was a 3rd round pick for the Cardinals who I already did the Cardinals deep dive, and his tape's actually better than I thought it would be for a rookie. And I had Horton much closer to like Keon White and Foskey and all those guys that went a lot of those guys that went in the 2nd round. So to get him in the 4th was, and then I want to get an undrafted free agent take from you. Their list was a little underwhelming, but if there's, in my opinion, maybe there's someone that you love, but I guess that's why I'm asking you the question is there anyone that you see making this team and even making an impact in year 1?
I don't know about making an impact because, like you, I was kind of like, all right. Like there wasn't any like obvious like, oh my god, how did they get him right? Ali Gay is like the one where I'm like, yeah, he'll probably make the team. Again, I don't know about making an impact because not that they have like an incredible edge rotation right now, but like Will Anderson could be really incredible. Grenard has splashed. Jerry Hughes is still doing it at his age. And again, we got Dylan Horton, Jacob Martin's there. So like there's a bunch of dudes in front of him. So I don't know if he'll ever get like legitimate playing time unless a bunch of people get hurt, but I do think he'll make the roster. And I think that, skill set wise, I think he's a little bit better run defender than pass rusher. So if he does get work, it'll probably be as a rotational guy on early downs to give all of the lighter, quicker pass rushers a breather. And he could contribute in that way. But I also was like similarly kind of meh on the UDFA class. I feel like they really struck most of their gold in the actual draft and in March when they were doing free agent stuff.
Yeah, for sure. The one guy, other guy, because I agree about Gay, would be maybe Zazavian Valade. Is that how you say that? Zazavian?
I think it's God, I remember I did a pronunciation sheet for myself for the draft. And I don't have it on this laptop, but I think it's Zazavian.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly. But yeah, I mean the running back room, obviously you got Pierce and you got Singletary as the number 2, and then it's a bunch of guys fighting for RB3, so maybe he can get on the team that way, but he's still probably a practice squad guy.
Yeah, for sure. Could be a nice. I don't want to overhype him, but could be a nice little scat back compliment to Pierce someday. All right, my final question for you, Brett, is I want to hear some of your existing veterans, or you can include some guys they signed as well, but. It's not all about the rookies. Who are some veteran players on this team that you would kind of pound the table for and say, these guys are going to make an impact and make a difference on this team's outcomes?
Does a year 2 player count as a veteran at this point? Because I've always been really high on Jalen Petre. And I think that, there were some early struggles in terms of missing tackles and everything like that, but he still was a tackling machine. Like he's always around the ball. He's another one of these guys where it's like, is he a safety? Is he a nickel? And the answer is yes. I'm ultra high on Petre. As long as he just learns to finish plays, he's going to be just ultra productive. For people that play IDP fantasy, go get him because he's going to be insanely productive amongst DBs. Laramie Tunsil is Laramie Tunsil, like other than Trent, best left tackle in football in my opinion, and that's mainly just because Trent I think is a better run blocker and they're equal in pass protection. But Laramie in pass protection is a wall. He's an absolute wall, and they pay him like it. I'd also say Titus Howard's underrated at right tackle. Like this is a really, really good tackle duo. And as long as Kendrick Green, like we talked about earlier, kind of cleans up his stuff, and if Juice comes in and plays like we think he can play as a rookie, this is going to be one of the better offensive lines in the league. Plus, like an underrated group of receiving weapons for him too. Like CJ Stroud is actually going to have a really good structure around him to succeed because they have those two tackles. Like I said, like this is not going to be a bottom 3 team. Like they had no shot at Caleb to begin with. So that's ultimately why they did the strategy they did in the draft, because they've low key built a pretty nice roster.
Yeah. Yeah. And Titus just keeps getting better every year. Like he was never going to be good right away. That was always the thing. Like he was raw coming out. So who knows like when that development's going to stop for him. And then I like that you brought up Petrie too, because I love like him and Jimmy Ward is like the perfect freaking rotational.
It's the Spider-Man meme. Like,
yeah,
just
exactly.
Same guy.
So they don't have to worry about like what side they're calling whatever they want to call to, because they can just, those guys can do the same exact things. It's going to be a ton of fun to see those guys on the back
also
end.
Denzel Perryman.
I tweeted about him the other day.
Still out here doing it. All these years later. And I remember when he was coming out and we're like, all right, 2-down player, like absolute thumper against the run. Don't know about how he is in coverage. And like a decade or more into it at this point, like he's still out there playing well. He actually was way better in coverage than I thought he would be. You know, he was Nick Bolton before Nick Bolton. And he's still going.
Yeah. Yeah. He's awesome. What did they get him for? Contract.
Let me look. I remember it wasn't a lot.
Because he is one of the guys in the league that like, how has he never gotten that like $30 million contract? Like he's way better than a lot of guys that get paid at that position.
So it's a 1-year deal for $1.2 million for a solid.
Like, are we watching the same tape? What is going on? He's good. He's legitimately good. Yeah.
I mean, he's 31, but it's like linebackers play into their early 30s. Like, I don't know.
I don't get it. Yep. He's going to be good. All right, Brett, thank you so much for coming on. You got anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
So let's see, this comes out, I think, on Sunday. Today, or rather 3 minutes before the start of June, I posted a video on wide zone and how it works. And, you know, you're a Packers fan, so I don't know if you're going to watch it because a lot of it's focusing on the 2019 NFC Championship game. But for teams that love wide zone and how it works and breaking down how running backs read it, you know, breaking down different combo blocks, the pre-snap reads, the post-snap reads, and just in general understanding the play call and why Kyle Shanahan has built his offense off of it and why the Texans will be building their offense off of it. That's a great video to watch because it's going to be the heart and soul of probably about a quarter of the offensive systems in the entire league if we're just counting up the entire Shanahan ecosystem.
No, that's good to know, because as I go through this series and every time one of these Shanahan teams comes up, I'm like re-describing what the scheme is. So now I can just refer them to your video. So that's perfect.
Yeah. And again, Packers fans, stay away from that one. It's gonna trigger some stuff.
I'll have to stomach it. All right. This was awesome. Thanks for the time. And thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you for the next one.